Okay, so we're going to finish this form up. So I'm going to work on the labels here. So down here, we'll just take form control labels, and we want to position those to be absolute and absolute. And that's because the form control itself is relative, so we're positioning absolute within that. And we're going to put from the top 15 pixels and from the left 0. Now right now the way it is, if I start to type in here, it's going to just cover the label, but ultimately the label is going to wave upwards when we click in here. Alright, now before we actually style the span, I want to add it because right now there is no span. You know, we don't have this, it's just label and then the word. So we're going to use JavaScript to basically turn this into this. So let's jump into our script.js, and first thing we want to do is bring in our labels. So let's use document.querySelectorAll, because it doesn't matter how many labels there are, we want to get them all. So form-control label, and that'll give us a node list of all the labels. So since it's a node list, we can go ahead and use for each on it, and we'll say for each label, for each label, I'm going to take the label.inner HTML and set it. Now, first, there's a couple things we want to do. We want to get the inner text, inner text, which is just going to be, you know, each letter. So E, M, A, I, L in this case for the first one. And then I'm going to split it into an array. I'm going to go on to the next line and call .split. And what that does, if we put an empty string in here, is it splits the letters into an array. So it'll be an array with the first value will be E, the second will be M, and so on. Now from that, I want to manipulate it. So I'm going to use .map, which you can use on an array, which now this is, to turn it into an array of something else. And what we want to turn it into for now is an array of the letters with a span around it with a transition delay. So let's say map, and this just takes in an arrow function, and we're just going to use backticks here because we want to just turn it directly into an array of spans that we're going to have here, but we need to pass in here for each letter. And then I also want the index, which just starts at 0 and increments for every item in the array. And I want to turn it into, let's say, span. And inside here, we want to have whatever the letter is. So this will turn it into an array of letters with a span around it. Now, obviously, we don't want an array. We want it to be a string, so we can use join and just pass in an empty string, and that will turn it back into a string. Okay, so basically, we have the inner text. So we're looping through the label. We have the inner text E-M-A-I-L for the first one. We're splitting it into an array, which will put each letter in its own item in the array. Then we're mapping it to create an array of the letter with a span around it. Then we're turning it back into a string. So if I save this now, we don't see any difference here, but if I open up my Elements tab and I click on the label here, you'll see that now they're wrapped in spans. So I'm not going to add the transition delay just yet. Let's go back to our CSS, and now that we have these spans, we can add styling for it. So let's see. Let's do just the span in general first. So we'll say form control label span, and I'm going to display. Let's do display inline block. It's inline by default. And then I'm going to increase the font size to 18 pixels, because before this wouldn't have worked because we didn't have spans around them. And then let's do a min dash width of 5 pixels, and we're going to add a transition on this because when we add the transform value, actually we'll add that first. So let's go up here, or down here rather, and let's say form control input focus. So focus meaning when we click inside, we want the direct label span, and we also want to do this on the validation. So I'll actually just copy this down, and we also want the valid state. So input valid. And what we'll do is just first of all change the color to light blue. So if I click in here, you can see the label turns light blue. I also want to turn the border light blue as well. So up here where we did the outline on the input focus and valid, let's do bottom, or I'm sorry, bottom, border bottom, and let's set that, or border bottom color rather, and set that to light blue. So that way when we click in here, both the border and the text here is light blue. Now, let's see, we want to move this up basically when we click in here. So to do that, we can add a transform, and we want to use translate Y because we're translating it. We're dealing with it on the Y axis. So translate Y, and I want to move it up, so it has to be a negative number. If I want to move it down, it would be positive. So let's do negative 30 pixels. So when I click in here, you can see they move up, and they just flicker up. It's not smooth, so that's why I'm going to add a transition onto the span right here. So let's say transition, and we'll do 0.3 seconds. And then we could do like an ease in, ease out. I'm going to use a cubic Bezier. So cubic Bezier. And then for the values here, basically what this is it defines a cubic Bezier defines a curve, and we can use it as a transition effect with a variable speed from start to end. And it takes in 4 points, which are P0, P1, P2, P3. P0 and P3 are the start and the end of the curve. So, I mean, it can get a lot more complicated if you're doing like really cool animations, but this is pretty simple. We're just going to do a couple values here, 0.68, negative 0.55, 0.265, and 1.55. So we'll have a variable speed on this transition. So if I click in here, you can see now it doesn't just flick up, it has that cool, almost like a bounce effect. Now we don't want the whole thing to go up at once. You could do that. I mean, you could leave it like that if you want, but I want to have that wave effect, so that's where the transition delay comes in. Because we already have the transition, and it's transitioning the this right here, the transform translate, where it moves up. So in our script here, let's add onto the span an inline style, and we'll set that to, let's say, transition dash delay. Now, when we set this, we don't want to set it to a fixed value because it'll do the same thing. It'll just wait and it'll flicker them all up at the same time. So what I'm going to do here is use the index, which just starts at 0, then 1, 2, 3, and so on, and I'm going to multiply it by 50. So the first one will be 0, second one 50, third one will be 150, then 200, 250, and so on. So now I'll save that, and if I click, okay, that didn't work. Oh, we need to add the milliseconds. So after the transition delay number, we need to have ms. All right, and there we go. And of course, you could change this, like we could do 30. We could do, 300, which is going to be very slow. So 300 milliseconds. I think that 50 is good though. You can make it faster, like 10. But you can barely see the wave. So I think 50 is a good number. So we'll keep it at 50 ms. All right, so that's how you can add this cool little effect. So that's it. Hopefully you guys like this project, and we'll move on to the next one.